You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of Zesty Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hey, welcome, Allison, to the podcast. We have a special guest here, Allison from Miscarriage Hope Desk. Welcome, Allison.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's nice chatting with you on a Monday morning.
Yes, happy to have you here. So, Allison, if you could start by just telling our listeners and myself a little bit more about your journey. How did you end up in this field? What in your journey with building a family? I'd love to hear the backstory.
Yeah, I'll just jump right in. So, as I think is the case for many women that end up in the infertility space, like I had no idea that's where I was going to land. I married my husband 5.5 years ago, and we knew we wanted a family. I wanted to wait a year just to, enjoy marriage. And then we were going to start trying. And the biggest conflict we had was, the number, like how many kids are we going to have? And we thought that was going to be our biggest issue because we were, we were off by one, big, major disagreement here. So that's kind of where we started. And then, as we got into it, I guess in the beginning, it took maybe 4 or 5 months. We were traveling a lot. Like when we first got married, we were not very stable and traveling and not really trying. I wasn't tracking my ovulation. I mean, I kind of knew in my mind when it was happening, but I wasn't testing that. But as soon as I got serious about it, I got pregnant really quickly. But then from there, I miscarried and didn't really think a lot about it just because, I went to my doctor and of course did some research and know that it's very common to have a miscarriage, and it was early on. It was strange. I did not realize I was pregnant because I had bleeding that I thought was a period. So then when I had the miscarriage, it was traumatic in its own way because it was this like gush of blood, and I had to go to the ER, and then I found out I was pregnant, and then I found out I wasn't. So that day itself was very traumatic, but it was a different miscarriage in that it wasn't a pregnancy I knew about when it happened. So then from there, I kind of continued down this pattern of thinking, okay, well, the next time we'll be fine. But we weren't. Again, I kind of got pregnant pretty quickly, and then miscarried again. But this time I did know about the pregnancy, so it was very devastating. Luckily, my OB was okay with doing some testing. A lot of times after 2, doctors won't test yet. Just because it can be, kind of what they call a fluke. But because of my age, I was over 35. And, just my doctor was okay with that. So I was able to do some more testing. I did get a few answers in that I have a blood clotting disorder called antiphospholipid syndrome. So from there, I thought, okay, well, now I have, I'd been in enough like forums and stuff like that I know most people, it's rare to get an answer. And so I was in a way like not excited, but I was glad to like have something that I could change moving forward. And I had a protocol, so I felt very confident going into that 3rd pregnancy. And that 3rd pregnancy really I started the protocol. It went really well. I was very sick, which I thought was really encouraging. I was throwing up a lot and just knew that this would be the one. And unfortunately, that one, it lasted even longer. I want to say at the 11 or I think it was between 11 and 12 weeks, I went in for my appointment and there was no heartbeat. So at that point, I was really devastated and wasn't really sure what to do moving forward. And I felt like, I'd had this protocol, I followed it, this was still happening. And that's where I just really got stuck. I really feel like I kind of broke down and wasn't sure how to continue on. And I know when I'm telling this story, because I've told it so many times, I still sometimes tear up, but sometimes I don't. And it's just because I have kind of told it so many times. So I don't want people that are listening that have gone through this to think I'm some unicorn that doesn't tear up when I talk about it, because I do a lot of times. And I definitely don't want to breeze past the fact of like how difficult they are physically, but like even more so emotionally, which is why after that third one, I really wasn't sure. I knew, I kind of regrouped with my husband. We definitely were both, we always knew we wanted a family. So like we knew we wanted to continue with a family. But I did not know if I could keep trying. I'm like, I don't think I can keep doing this. I just felt like because of the miscarriages, my whole life was in a downward cycle. Like I felt like nothing was going right. But I kind of knew enough to like look outside of it and be like, because of this, like everything else was just kind of, it felt like this spiral. And I'm like, I can't keep doing it because I'm in this place that I feel like it's going to just keep happening unless I change something. So, I was able to kind of have that awareness. But at the same time, I had this thing of like age, right? Like there's always, you're thinking, well, but I don't have time to take a break. I don't have, like I'm only getting older. And so I had that voice in my head as well. So we did kind of continue to try, even though I was starting the conversation of, okay, what else can we do? And for me, that was adoption. So, and I know that's not the case for everyone, but it was a very well thought out next step for me. It was also so in that time period of kind of being very dark and kind of like having what I call like a breakdown, just like tears and all of that. I also then got very quiet. I had a meditation practice, but I sometimes go in and out of like how much I go back to that. And I really went back to that meditation practice of getting quiet, of really listening. And when I started doing that, I knew it was loud and clear that I was hearing that adoption was my next step. And for me, that was, God speaking directly to me. And I just knew. And then it took a little while to like have those conversations with my husband. But he eventually kind of got on board with that as well. So, but in the meantime, I did get pregnant again, had a fourth miscarriage. This one, again, so it just kind of,
wow.
it just kind of continued. And, and at that point, I think we'd maybe started the process of like doing the research for adoption. So just kind of like reinforce, like, look, like I can't keep doing this. Like I've got to like, this feels like where like, this is what I'm being called towards is adoption. And then we had what I would call the most magical adoption story ever, where we got through the process very quickly. Yes, it's a lot of paperwork, but I think after everything I'd been through, it was nice to have something that I could go through, and it was kind of just checking off the list, and it wasn't me and my body. And so for me, it was kind of a break from all of that. And then we didn't even get to the agency we were going to work with. We just went with the local agency for our home studies. We got approved. We're planning in January to go with another agency, but we could pay a small fee and get on their list. So I said, we might as well get on their list. And the other strange thing is like, I told my husband and my mom a few times that one, I thought it would happen really fast. And two, like I kind of thought we were going to get a Christmas baby. And even my mom, so she was there that year for Christmas, she was at our house, and I told her, and we hadn't had any calls yet, because a lot of times you'll get calls, it's not a match. Adoption process can take a long time. And you can have a lot of mismatches or cases where, you're in the running, but then you're not selected. And we hadn't had anything yet. But I told my mom before she left, I said, we're going to get a Christmas baby. You should probably stick around. And I think the day I told her that was the day my son was born. because she left. And I think 2 days later, we got a phone call from the hospital that there was a baby boy that was there just waiting for us. And we just needed to come and sign the paperwork, basically. So
Wow, that's amazing, Allison.
it was very magical. And usually if you get a call, it's like the mom's in labor. And, so there's still kind of a time period where you have to wait for her to sign off on the paperwork. And so there's usually still like this like waiting period. But for us, by the time we got the phone call, he'd already been born. We had to be at the hospital we had 2 hours to get to the hospital. We had to buy, she said, don't worry, the only thing you need is a car seat. And at this point I bought nothing because I was so, I just couldn't bring myself to buy anything. And so we bought a car seat and a few random things at Bye Bye Baby right before it closed, and showed up at the hospital, and they put that baby in my arms. And it was, I say the best moment of my life. And now I've kind of had 2 of those as I get further into my story. But yeah, it was just the second I just knew like that was my plan. The other really cool thing was I talked with the nurses and was asking, because I had never been able to delete my pregnancy weeks from my calendar on my phone. So I knew from that 3rd miscarriage that I looked at that pregnancy calendar and I would have been 38 and a half weeks. And so I asked the nurses, I said, how far along was the mom? So it was a closed adoption, so we didn't get to meet the mom or anything like that. But I said, how far along was the mom? And they said 38 and a half weeks. And the second thing, I mean, I already knew it was my baby, but then when they said that, I'm like, wow, like this really is my gift from God. So, yeah, I mean that, so there was all those down cycles, and then that was like really magical. And gosh, then from there though, like we knew we wanted a family, and we knew we wanted kind of multiple kids. So we kind of, even when that happened, we knew that our journey wasn't over. And I actually got pregnant. And so here's the thing, if you adopt, everyone says, well, as soon as you adopt, you'll get pregnant and it'll just happen, and as soon as we adopted, I got pregnant. He was actually, I don't even know if it was before or after the actual adoption. Maybe it was like right as it happened. So I got a positive pregnancy test when he was like a few weeks old. And I thought, well, this is how it's going to happen. It's just going to magically work. And I had my protocol and I was going to go through and do that. Well, it did not happen. I had another miscarriage. And and that one, honestly, like that miscarriage, I really like to, I don't know, point that one out to people, because and I know it's hard for people that aren't in the infertility world or haven't gone through that. They're just trying to be encouraging and they want to be positive and they want to, help you along. But when people, always automatically go to, well, now that you've adopted, it'll just happen. I like to remind them that, maybe that's not the case. And it's not, for someone who's been through a lot, that's kind of hard to hear sometimes. So anyway, that was not the next step. From there, we actually then took a step back and said, I'm like, we've got to stop trying, because I can't have this keep happening until we find out more of what's going on. I mean, throughout this whole thing, we've been doing testing and lab work and supplement, I've been doing the whole thing, but I think every time after a loss, I'm like, let's take a step back and revisit, what's going on. So we did that and started looking at IVF clinics and doing some testing there. We also started working with a functional medicine doctor who really, I felt like, was getting it and like looking at labs of both me and my husband, and tweaked our supplements a little bit. We also did some genetic testing, which I think uncovered some answers. But that was kind of the first year of my son's life. And by the end of that first year, we were ready to jump into a round of IVF, only because we'd found that my husband had an issue that might be helped by doing ICSI sperm. So that's kind of what convinced me over there, because I was hesitant to go that route since I was getting pregnant. But unfortunately, with the IVF round, we ended up with no viable embryos, which was, I think even the doctor was shocked, because I've gotten pregnant so many times that just really wasn't what anyone expected. So that was, as you can imagine, very devastating. That was also the point in the journey where, so that whole year I'd been talking to my husband. I'm like, we have got to do something. So we were both entrepreneurs. Already that's our background. We'd always kind of had our own companies. And, but whenever we were talking about, we're like, gosh, like, there's the infertility world and, has a lot of great resources and everything, but there was nothing specific to miscarriage and nothing specific to recurrent loss. And I just always felt like a bit of an outsider because, I was getting pregnant. So I wasn't in that world of like struggling to get pregnant. And then with the IVF thing, like it's just like this totally different story too, especially considering my background. And I was like, I really feel like there could be a resource specific to this group because I felt like I was the only one, but the more I was, in Facebook groups and things like that, I'm like, other women are going through this and they need to see that. And I would like get on podcasts and like try and, search for people that had gone through it. And it's like really hard to find. So it was around that time too that I was like, I'm going to do something with this. So that was November of last year. And I came up with the name. I was on a girls' retreat. This was back in the day of retreats. And they knew that what I was wanting to do. And so we really kind of took some time to mastermind over it. And we came up with the name Miscarriage Hope Desk. I reserved the name. I was getting ready to start the process of, building that. I knew that was kind of my next step. I wanted to build something specific for women going through this. And then in January, so like once, I think it was the second cycle after that failed IVF round, I was pregnant once again. We were doing, and we were kind of in the middle of, we had been doing some new things. So I'd been doing a few more, kind of really focusing in on diet and supplements. And, so it was, when you're trying to think like what changed, and I don't know, there were a few things that were different, but I got pregnant. The Miscarriage Hope Desk was in the process of being built out. So I had sent that to the designer. So they were in the middle of designing that when I got the pregnancy test. And then like the same time I got really sick. And so it was really interesting. So as Miscarriage Hope Desk was being built out, I was in bed throwing up all day from being pregnant. And but it was just like, I had no idea. So our plan was to kind of take a step back, do things, reevaluate everything we were doing before we jumped into another round of IVF. I said, let's do another one in the spring. Well, this would have been the spring of 2020. So, I got that pregnancy. We didn't stop trying. So I was like, well, we're doing all the steps. We might as well keep trying. And looking back, like so grateful that it happened then, because I doubt I would have been able to do a round of, IVF in the spring of 2020. And then how cool that like, as I was building Miscarriage Hope Desk, I was going through my long-term, full-term healthy pregnancy, which of course was not my plan, but I think that was probably, the plan all along and something I couldn't have orchestrated. But so this past year I had a full-term healthy pregnancy. I now have how old is he? 10-week-old baby boy. And
10 weeks.
Yeah. So Miscarriage Hope Desk launched in June or July. And then I had my son the end of September. So it was kind of along the same time period. And so that's been really cool. And it's just helped to really fuel my motivation to, get out there to other women that are struggling like what I went through, but having had this success story really kind of fuels me to like show them that there is, hope, and there's different ways of getting there. And it's not always like the path that you think it's going to be. So yeah, you asked. So I think that's a lot of the major milestones. That pregnancy, that could be a whole podcast on itself. Pregnancy after miscarriage, it's not easy. There was definitely, especially the first trimester, just with my history, and then there were a few scares in the genetic testing, and so that the whole thing. But now I'm here, and could not be happier, and so it's just been a very cool evolution of like everything kind of coming together after years of struggle. So
wow, Allison, that is Thank you for sharing that story, because I know there's so many people out there who've had different iterations, right? Like maybe
Yep.
they've gone through IVF, or maybe they've had miscarriage or multiple recurrent, or right, the having actual pregnancy after, and to hear that there's all these different variations that could happen, and that when it's happened to somebody else, we like to, in our world, we like to really celebrate, okay, that could be us, and maybe
Yeah.
this is a sign. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Like you said, giving some hope. Can you share a little bit of, I know on your site I found you have an amazing miscarriage testing checklist. Can you share some of the details of the things that you wish you'd known earlier on, and share the resource as well, of course. But
Mhm.
I love that you have, more details about hormones, and share a little bit about what's the male role and what's missed a lot in testing, in your opinion.
Yeah, and this is a big motivation around why I created Miscarriage Hope Desk is, and this also came from those groups that I'm in. Is too often I hear, women say, "Well, they've tested for everything and they didn't find anything." And my background, so I'm actually a dietitian by background, so I, kind of know enough about testing that one, like that's just never true, right? You can all there. I'm sure there's tests out there that I haven't done, so there's always going to be other tests. Now, whether or not there's research to back them up or anything like that, you can always debate that, but there's always going to be unlimited testing. But looking back over my journey, like there were definitely tests that we did, 2-3 years in, that I'm like, gosh, like if we would have done this on day one and uncovered this, like that would have been like, we could have changed and that's really what it comes down to too with me in testing, is like, if this comes back, like, will it impact the protocol and the steps you take moving forward? And if so, that's a really valuable test to do. So yeah, so for Miscarriage Hope Desk, I knew that that was going to be one of the things I wanted to create, was just a checklist of what's all the testing that you should be looking at. And then you can take it to your doctor and be like, look, like we haven't, we're not testing my husband for anything. So that was my case. You asked specifically about male, and my husband wasn't tested for anything for the first, I want to say 2 years. It wasn't until IVF doctor number 3. So we only went through one round, but I met with several doctors and went through their testing and then didn't feel comfortable moving forward. So, but yeah, it was the third IVF doctor, but like, I mean, doctor number, who knows, maybe 9 or 10, that finally did a full sperm analysis, but also included sperm fragmentation, which is like a DNA fragmentation on the sperm, which a lot of people don't test for, but can actually lead to miscarriage, which makes sense, right? The embryo is made up of the egg and the sperm. If they're not, completely healthy, like they're not gonna, you may get pregnant, but then the pregnancy may not last because one or the other is not, optimal. So, that's an example of a test that, was overlooked for several months. And the cool thing is, when coming back to the, but how is that going to impact your protocol? So there's different things you can do if you do have the DNA fragmentation on your sperm. One of which is the ICSI sperm. So that's kind of why we landed on IVF. But then there's other things like having him ejaculate before you try. Kind of the thinking is the fragmentation can happen when the sperm's like sitting there. So if you kind of clear it out, then that can lessen the chances that it's going to be fragmented. And then, there's some other dietary and lifestyle things that are very similar to kind of like the blanket advice you would give of like, eat a healthier diet, don't smoke, cut out alcohol or caffeine, some of those things, or maybe not cut them out altogether, but the specific ones were, I don't know, I just felt like with that one, there were specific things we could change and address. And those were things with this healthy full-term pregnancy that we did do. So whether or not that was like the thing that got us there, I mean, we'll never know that. But it's like, gosh, if there's a simple thing that we can do, it's really good to know that sooner rather than later.
And then Allison, was one of our listeners asked how age plays into the role of miscarriage. Does that increase with age?
So, I mean, there's definitely a correlation between age and miscarriage. I mean, that's just that is true. That being said, there's a lot that you can do to kind of help counteract that. So there's a lot of lifestyle and dietary and, just looking at things like hormone balance. And, for me, I think it's really important, no matter what age, but especially as you get older, to find a doctor that you can work with one-on-one that really understands your situation. And I think when you do that, age plays way less of a factor, because you're addressing those things that may have cropped up because of age, but they can totally, in most cases, it's often something that can be controlled for. Maybe it's an autoimmune issue or something like that. But so, I mean, my answer is kind of yes and no.
Okay. And how do you feel from an emotional standpoint? What kind of support do you wish you had, or could women reach out for? I imagine processing the loss each time.
Yes.
It's a different process for everyone, but what kind of resources could you share there? Because, we talk all the time about the importance of staying out of fight or flight and getting in parasympathetic. And if this is a constant thought and fear, right, going into the next, then I imagine you're not in a state of parasympathetic. So any resources, tools, advice around that would be lovely.
Yeah. And that is such an important point. Something that I like to talk about a lot and that's kind of where I was like, I've got to shift from trying, because I could tell I'm just not in that state and I don't know how to get in that state. And so that's kind of when we made the turn for adoption. But, meditation is something that can really help, and breath work, therapy. I've done both. So couples therapy for me was especially helpful, just because, you and yours, at least for me and my spouse, we grieve totally differently. And I had, I would always have expectations of how I wanted him to help me in my grieving process, but he doesn't, so having a couples therapist can really help the two of you to go through it together. Because is definitely, it was hard on our marriage. We made it through and we're in a great place right now, but that couples therapy really helped. And just understanding that we are going to go through it differently. And, the way that he shows support isn't maybe the way I'm looking for it, but if once I recognize that he is showing support, it can just help me feel supported, which was really helpful. So really kind of diving deep into that, I think, is helpful. And then the other thing is just giving yourself a pause. You have to take a break. You can't just, and this is kind of the trap that I got into, is I was like, oh, I gotta keep trying though. Cause I changed the supplement. I'm going to try again. I just wanted to keep trying. So I felt this urgency, but really it's if you just pause, kind of going back to that age thing. Yes, age plays a factor, but you're not going to get until you pause and kind of get into a calm state, you're not going to get there. And so really giving yourself permission to have that is so important. So important to really do that. And that's something that I didn't do a great job of for most of the time that I was going through it. And then of course, just finding other women that have gone through it is really helpful. So, I have a Facebook group too, where it's women that are going through recurrent loss. And so seeing that, because I know for me, that was hard to find at the time, but now I see so many women, unfortunately, do go through some form of loss and recurrent loss. So, if you can connect to women that are going through that, that can just help you kind of feel less alone, and maybe encourage each other to take the pause, something that's maybe hard to just do on your own,
Yeah. Support is everything. And a group that I know some people have mentioned before, they want to be in a group for support. They also don't want to be in a place where it's constant, sad stories, right? So you want to have a mix of some support and feedback, but also a safe space for people.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there are some of the most common, what's the top level thing to look at? We had a listener asked about, if she lost a baby around 8 weeks and everything was chromosomally normal. I know you had mentioned in one of your posts, structural issues and hormone issues, that we're not always considering all these things. Is there kind of an order that you think to look through these things?
I mean, and I'm also not a doctor, so I don't have an exact like, oh, here's the order you should go through. But yeah, I mean, there's some easy, like structural issues as an example of kind of like, let's just check that off the list because that's an easy one. And if it's there, you're probably not going to be successful until you get it taken care of. So to me, it's kind of just taking a step back, looking at everything that's there, and then working with your doctor to figure out like based on you, because also like some of the autoimmune stuff, you might want to look at like symptoms that you're having and then base it on that. So, you can't always say for each person, this is where you should start because it kind of depends on your whole picture and what you have going on where you want to start really doing that testing. But I am a big proponent of doing some testing to figure out what's going on sooner rather than later, just so you can kind of check things off the list. But then, yeah, figuring out what a priority is, that's, you really have to work with the doctor to see what's going to be top priority for you.
Yeah, we're all so different. So that's where an amazing functional doctor comes into play. Did you find, or have you heard from women, does a miscarriage have negative effects on your cycle after that, or were there shifts for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a cycle or two after it impacted me, but after that, I mean, it really, for me personally, it didn't take that long. And I think it depends too, like, how far along you are, when you miscarry and some of that, but it doesn't necessarily like have this like long-term negative effect or anything. So, a lot of times you can start trying pretty quickly after. Again, that comes back to it depends on you and your cycle and how far along you are in a lot of those things.
Allison, do you have any advice for people who are trying to decide whether to keep trying or not? I know that's such a personal decision, but how do you kind of tap into when to push forward and when to pull back?
That is the question, right? Like that is the question. And I think and that's something that only the person can answer for themselves. So I think that's the most important thing, is like, don't go to outside sources to find that answer. So don't come to me for that answer. No, but like seriously, that's something where you really need to get quiet and listen to yourself and know what you want. And work with your spouse on that too. But like first, like decide what you want for yourself, because until you can't do any of the other stuff, and no one else can tell you that. And maybe and I told my husband this a lot. I was like, look, I don't know what number miscarriage it's going to be, but there's going to be a number where I'm like, this is done. Like maybe it's number 3, maybe it's number 7, but I'm not going to do this like indefinitely. So there is a stopping point, and I don't know when that's going to be, but I'll raise my hand when it is. And that's where kind of after that third one, I'm like, look, I'm raising my hand. Like I can't, and I wasn't done. So that kind of goes back to the pause too. And that's what I tell people, to give themselves permission. Sometimes you don't have to like always make the decision of like, oh, I'm not going to pursue this ever, 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 ever again. You can also make the decision of, you know what, for the next 3 months, I'm not going to try and I'm going to take a break. So you can also not have it be an all or nothing thing, but just like, I'm not ready to make this decision now. I'm going to revisit this decision on this date. So that's a way to look at it as well. And yeah, I mean, that's just such a personal decision, and it's not one to be taken lightly. It's something to really, consider, and really you do need to just get quiet and listen to yourself. And that can be really uncomfortable, especially when you're going through something that's so hard as a miscarriage. It's hard to get quiet. It's hard because there's that grief, and so really just, and that's where I think, meditation, or if you have like a prayer or some sort of practice like that, where you get quiet, that's just so important, because you need to know that within yourself.
Yeah, Allison, I don't know if you use tapping at all, but I do have a few clients who've used, kind of tapping. The tapping solution has an app, and there's one for loss, and there's one, there's some for grief. And I think just whatever each person can do to kind of physically move the energy,
Yes.
Get quiet, get aligned with whatever is best for them.
Yeah, no, anything like that. And, throughout my years, like I've relied on a lot of different modalities, and I think just whatever resonates with you is awesome.
Yeah. So what about someone who has a friend who is going through something like this? Like you mentioned, I wish people hadn't have said, right, that to me.
I'd love some advice. Everyone wants to help these people in their life, and they're also like afraid to say the wrong thing or right. So do you have just any either advice or resources or somewhere where that person could understand a little bit more to support someone who's going through this?
Yeah, that one's tricky, especially the more I'm in some of these, like groups, and the more I talk to women that have gone through similar, because everyone's different, right? Like something, just know like there's a lot of things that can be triggering. But that being said, I don't think that should prevent you from saying anything. So I think the worst thing is to just not acknowledge that it's happened and not say anything. Miscarriage can be a really uncomfortable topic. I'm kind of trying to change that in some ways, make sure that it is more talked about. So I think the most important thing is just like letting them know that you're there, and listen. I think, if you can listen, you're not going to have the right words, and that's okay. Maybe even just acknowledge that, like, look, I don't know the right thing to say, but I'm here and I can listen. And that's really can be really meaningful. And then from there, let them kind of guide like what's going to be helpful for them. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember hearing once someone shared if someone else were to lose a family member or have a loss, just to say, I can't even imagine what you're going through. If I've never experienced it, I just can't imagine, to at least, instead of being afraid of saying anything at all, just to say, I'm here for you. And I can't imagine.
No, that's the best, because you can't try, don't pretend like you know what they're going through, and because everyone has their own journey and experience. So just kind of be there.
Yeah, because we can tend to jump into fix it mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a doctor. I have a whatever. Have you tried acupuncture? Have you tried this? And I, imagine just being heard at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. We did have a listener ask about COVID and miscarriages. Have you heard? I know we're kind of new into this. So have you heard anything along those lines of research around COVID?
No, I haven't. And of course, like in the beginning, I had to then take a step back from research because I was pregnant during COVID. But yeah, because it's so new, they're really, I haven't seen anything that links the two, fortunately. It's always, it's always best to try and, stay healthy and safe when you're pregnant, just regardless of what's going around. But yeah, I haven't seen anything that links those two specifically.
Anything specifically when you're looking for a practitioner that you found to be helpful to kind of, I guess maybe your checklist of seeing if they're on board with you, but any advice around finding someone who can understand this situation?
Yeah, I think the first thing is don't be afraid to to talk to multiple people, right? And if someone doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't matter how many people said they love them. If you don't feel like a connection with them, that's not the person for you. So don't be afraid to kind of keep interviewing and keep working. And, there were times where I'm like, oh, this person's great. And I would work with them for a period of time. And then then it wasn't a fit. And then I would kind of move on. So don't be afraid to continue to do that. But when you do, things to look for, especially, so if you are going through recurrent loss, definitely look for someone that has experience in recurrent loss specifically, because there's a lot. And so I have an advisory board that I put together for Miscarriage Hope Desk, partly so I could have resources to point people towards, since I'm not a doctor, I've just gone through it personally. I have some great people on my advisory board that I could point people towards. But again, it's just kind of doing your research, knowing what you're willing to do. Also, there were doctors that I would have the initial interview with, and I'm like, I'm not there. I can't, that's not a fit. And just making sure, like you said, that they're open to doing testing, because that can be a big roadblock if you get stuck with a doctor that just is like, no, I don't think we need to test anymore.
I know this is not the main topic, but do you mind speaking just a little bit to how pregnancy and labor were during COVID? Did that change things a lot with protocols?
Yeah, it was hard. And especially, this was my first full-term pregnancy after a lot of loss. So I was like, I wanted to get, and actually this is kind of, I'll answer two questions, one that you didn't ask, but pregnancy after miscarriage is hard. But my advice is allow yourself to get excited, right? Like, it's gonna suck if the worst outcome happens. It's gonna suck regardless of whether you get excited or you try and protect yourself and not get excited. So I always recommend trying to like get excited even if it's hard. And so I, allow myself to get excited, but I do feel like I missed out on a lot of things, that a lot of the fun parts of pregnancy. Like I didn't get to people didn't get to see me pregnant, like my friends didn't get to rub my pregnant belly. I go to church, and like usually at church, like people would see you each week and comment on, your pregnancy. And I didn't get any of, like, no one saw me. So it was almost like the pregnancy, other than between me and my husband and then my son, who won't remember it, no one really witnessed it. So, and that's true whether you've gone through miscarriage or not. And that's, I think, true no matter what you have going on right now. It's like there's that connection piece that's missing. And then, the ultrasounds, my husband didn't get to be a part of them. Someone said, well, why don't you FaceTime him in and let him like see the ultrasound? And he got to go to like a few of the major ones. But in terms of FaceTiming, I finally came to terms with the fact that like, he enjoyed seeing the ultrasounds as well, but I enjoyed them so much that I was like, no, I'm not going to spin my ultrasound on my device. This is the highlight of my week. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to enjoy seeing my baby, and I'm going to like love every second of it. And like, yeah, it sucks that he's not there, but I had a serious conversation with him about it. And he's like, like he could go either way if I FaceTimed him or not. And I was like, look, I'm not going to like try and force it to be like so important to him and then me miss out on it. So I just went in there and I enjoyed it. And it did suck that he couldn't be there, but that was, it was what it was. And then, the labor and delivery and all of that, that was hard too. Although I did end up getting to have a doula. I found out last minute that the hospital I was at, like they allowed a medical support person in addition to my husband. So that was kind of a pleasant surprise that I wasn't planning on. And yes, I had to get tested before I went in, but I didn't have to wear a mask. So that was good because I didn't want to have to labor with a mask. And what else happened? I mean, a lot of women I saw complain like, oh no, I have to get a test because it's like the nose swab, which is uncomfortable. But I'm like, you're going in to give birth. Like a 5-second nose swab. Like I'm not that concerned about a 5-second nose swab. There's a lot else that's going to go on that I'm concerned about, but that's not one of them. So I think sometimes I would see, I'd hear women that were going in to like deliver, and that was like their concern. I'm like, I was concerned about testing positive because then that would be, a whole other thing. But yeah, so they're definitely, and this again, it's not just people that have gone through miscarriage, but anyone that was pregnant this year, there were benefits. I got to really, it forced me to stay home. It forced me to take things slow. We had a lot of travel. So I was super sick again. Like there were the first 20 weeks, I was in bed and did not get out. And except when I stood up, I threw up. So I didn't stand up all day. But then the last half, I felt better, but it really was nice to be forced to like really take it slow, really enjoy it. So yeah, while there were things I missed out on, there were also some benefits too.
I'm so glad your husband got to be there and a doula. So yes, that is great. Yeah. I hadn't thought about the day-to-day of being in public, right? And the belly and the church, that part. I was thinking more along the lines of appointments and just the logistics, but I can see that it was almost just a private experience for you and your family.
Well, yeah, because it may be the only pregnancy I ever have. And so I remember towards the end though, I didn't do anything, but towards the end I went in to like pick up a prescription, and I went into the actual store, and it was so fun because someone asked me like how far along I was, and it was like the first time anyone had asked me that. And I was like, I almost like didn't want to leave Walgreens because it was fun to like have people see me pregnant.
Just hanging out at Walgreens.
Yep. Look, I'm pregnant.
See my belly.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, you have been through a lot, Allison. So happy to hear the ending of that story. That's exciting. And the magic, there's a lot of magic along the way as well. So
Yes.
Anything else you would like to share, and just where to find you, where to find those resources you mentioned?
Yeah. Well, the resources I mentioned, so Miscarriage Hope Desk is the website. And if you go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs, LABS, that'll take you there to sign up for that checklist, which is a really good place to make sure you're kind of not overlooking things, like you said, like structural issues or something. Um, and then we have a Facebook group, and then we also have an Instagram account, which I know is kind of a nice place too for people to kind of talk about things. We share stories of hope, both on our website, and then we also have a podcast. So everything's named Miscarriage Hope Desk: podcast, Instagram, Facebook, all of it's Miscarriage Hope Desk. So that's the easiest way to find us, and then just kind of whichever way you most like to connect with people. And maybe it's podcast since you're listening to a podcast, but if you're on Instagram, check us out there too. Yeah, and just if someone's going through a hard fertility, time, whether it's miscarriage or just fertility issues in general, like, it's hard. I don't know, and I think just like kind of acknowledging that, and taking the time that you need to really process that, to grieve. It's okay to cry. Like, I still sometimes have to like cry when I think about it, and I think that's very therapeutic. So just really, doing the best you can to give yourself some grace.
Thank you so much. This has been fabulous, Allison.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare, and we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads, and we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting-edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.